The silence in this house was a physical thing. It had weight. It settled in the corners and draped itself over the furniture I'd spent too much money on, a fine layer of dust and quiet. I told myself this was what I wanted. Peace. A neat, orderly life without the emotional shrapnel of my past. I had Mark. I had this house. I had a job that paid the bills. It was a checklist, and I had ticked all the boxes. Mark was a box I'd ticked with particular care. He was stable, predictable. He worked in finance and wore crisp shirts that always smelled faintly of starch. Our relationship was a calm, shallow sea. No towering waves, no terrifying depths. He didn't ask for more than I was willing to give, which, I had to admit, wasn't much. After Alex, that was a blessing. Alex had wanted everything, and when I gave it to him, he'd decided it wasn't enough and walked away, leaving me hollowed out and terrified of my own capacity to feel. So yes, Mark was safe. The house was safe. My life was a carefully constructed fortress designed to keep the world, and myself, at a manageable distance. And then the boiler broke. Of course it did. It was the coldest week in November, the kind of damp, biting cold that seeps right through the walls and into your bones. The silence of the house was no longer peaceful, it was cold. A dead, sterile cold that the space heaters I bought in a panic from the hardware store could barely touch. The house wasn't a fortress anymore, it was a tomb. Mark was away on a business trip. Just call a repairman, Leo, he'd said over the phone, his voice distant, already thinking about his next meeting. Get the top-rated one. Don't cheap out, he was practical. He saw problems and solutions, not the creeping dread I felt at the house failing, at the cold winning. I found a company online with stellar reviews. Reliable Mechanicals, the name was as uninspired as my life, which felt fitting. I booked the earliest appointment. The woman on the phone was pleasant. She said she'd send their best technician. His name was Julian. The next morning, a large black van pulled into my driveway. It was immaculate, far cleaner than my own car. A man climbed out, and for a moment, I just watched from the window. He was tall, built with a solid, capable strength that was evident even in the way he moved. He wore dark blue work overalls with the company logo stitched over the chest, and the fabric strained slightly across his shoulders as he reached back into the van for a heavy-looking toolbox. I opened the door before he could knock. The cold air rushed in, and so did he, bringing with him the scent of winter air, engine oil, and something else, a clean, sharp soap. Leo, he asked. His voice was a low baritone, deeper than I expected. It seemed to vibrate in the cold, quiet air of my hallway. That's me, I managed. Julian. From Reliable, he offered a hand. His was calloused, the nails short and clean, but with faint traces of grease etched into the lines of his skin. When I shook it, a jolt of warmth shot up my arm, a startling contrast to the chill of the house. His grip was firm, confident, and then our eyes met. It was nothing. It was just a glance. The polite, professional meeting of eyes between a customer and a service provider. But it wasn't. His eyes were a dark, rich brown, the color of coffee just before you add the cream. And they weren't just looking at me, they were seeing me. There was a flicker of something in them. Curiosity, maybe. An intensity that felt entirely out of place in this mundane transaction. It lasted only a second, maybe two, but my carefully constructed walls trembled. I dropped his hand too quickly. It's in the basement, I said, my voice a little tight. I turned and led the way, hyper-aware of his heavy work boots on my pristine hardwood floors. I could feel his presence behind me, a solid, warm reality in my cold, empty house. What was that? Nothing. It was nothing. I have a boyfriend. Mark will be home in 3 days. This is just a man here to fix a machine. The basement was damp and smelled of earth and concrete. The boiler, a hulking metal beast, sat in the far corner, silent and useless. I flicked on the single bare bulb that hung from the ceiling, casting long, dancing shadows. There's the patient, I said, trying for a bit of levity. It fell flat. Julian set his toolbox down with a heavy thud. He didn't seem to notice the cold or the gloom. He walked over to the boiler and ran a hand over its metal casing, a strangely gentle gesture, like he was calming a nervous animal. Right? He said, more to himself than to me. Let's see what you've done. I stood there awkwardly, hovering by the stairs. I didn't know the protocol. Was I supposed to stay? Make small talk? Offer him coffee? The thought of trying to make small talk felt exhausting. "You can go back upstairs if you want," he said, not looking at me. He was already pulling tools from his box, laying them out on a canvas cloth with practiced efficiency. "Might be a while. And it's freezing down here. I'll stay," I heard myself say. Why did I say that? "In case you need anything." It was a flimsy excuse. He had a van full of everything he could possibly need. He glanced up at me then, and a small smile touched the corner of his mouth. It transformed his face, softening the professional focus into something warmer, more human. "Suit yourself. Don't say I didn't warn you when you start turning blue. I have a boyfriend." The thought was a shield. I leaned against the concrete wall, crossed my arms, and watched him work. He moved with an economy of motion, every action precise and purposeful. He unscrewed a panel, his hands surprisingly deft for their size. The muscles in his forearms flexed under the fabric of his overalls. I found myself staring, then quickly looked away, my cheeks flushing with heat despite the cold. It's just the cold. It's making me weird. For a long time, the only sounds were the scrape and clank of his tools, the soft huff of his breath in the chilled air. The silence felt different with him in it. It was no longer empty. It was charged, filled with unspoken things. I studied the cracks in the concrete floor, the cobwebs in the rafters, anything to avoid looking at him. But my eyes kept drifting back. "So," he said, his voice startling me. He was on his back now, sliding under a mess of pipes, his voice slightly muffled. "New house." Yeah. "Moved in about 6 months ago. Nice place," he said. "Big. You rattling around in here by yourself?" The question was casual, but it felt pointed. It felt like he already knew the answer. "My boyfriend, Mark, lives with me," I said. The words came out too fast, too defensive. I needed him to know. I needed myself to remember. "He's traveling for work." Was all he said. There was a pause, filled only with the screech of a stubborn bolt giving way. Lucky him. Getting to escape this cold snap, was that what he meant? Or was he talking about something else? I was overthinking it. Of course I was. This was what I did. I took small moments and blew them up, dissected them until they were meaningless. Alex used to hate it. "Stop analyzing everything, Leo. Just live." I was trying to just live. A quiet, safe life. Julian slid out from under the pipes, a smear of grease on his cheek. He sat up and looked directly at me. That gaze again. It felt like it could strip paint. "Hand me that flashlight, would you?" The yellow 1-inch I pushed off the wall and grabbed it from beside his toolbox. Our fingers brushed as I passed it to him. His skin was rough, but incredibly warm. It was the briefest of contacts, an accident, a non-event. But my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. My whole body felt lit up, every nerve ending tingling from that single, meaningless touch. It's just static electricity. From the cold, dry air. He took the flashlight without comment, his expression unreadable, and disappeared back into the guts of the machine. I retreated to my wall, my shield, my mantra. I have a boyfriend. I have a boyfriend. He is a good man. He is stable. This is nothing. This mechanic, this stranger, is nothing. But the warmth from his fingers lingered on my own, a ghost of heat in the suffocating cold. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty that settled deep in my gut, that it was not nothing. It was something, and it was already too late. He worked for another hour, the sounds of his labor echoing in the small, cold space. I stayed, a silent observer, my internal world a chaotic storm of denial and unwanted feeling. I watched the confident set of his shoulders, the way he would bite his lower lip in concentration, the surprising grace in his movements. He was a complete stranger, yet I felt this bizarre, unnerving sense of familiarity, as if I were watching someone I had known for a very long time. "All right," he finally grunted, pulling himself out. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. The grease stain on his cheek was still there. I had a ridiculous urge to reach out and wipe it away. I clenched my fists at my sides. "Did you find the problem?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "I found a problem," he corrected, a wry twist to his lips. "The pilot assembly is completely shot. Looks like the thermocouple is fried." Too, he spoke a language I didn't understand, but I nodded as if I did. "I don't have the part on the van. I'll have to order it. Should be here tomorrow morning." Tomorrow. He was coming back tomorrow. The thought sent a wave of something through me that was equal parts dread and a dizzying, treacherous relief. So, another night without heat. He looked at me, and his professional mask seemed to slip for a second. I saw a flash of genuine sympathy in his eyes. Afraid so. I'm sorry. I can try to put a rush on it. It's fine, I said quickly. It's not your fault the old thing decided to die. Still, he started packing his tools away, the movements just as precise as when he'd taken them out. No one should be in a house this cold. He paused, his back to me. You got somewhere else you can stay? Friends? Family nearby? The question was kind. It was thoughtful, and it made my throat tighten. I had friends, but they were Mark's friends, mostly. A network of couples who talked about mortgages and vacation packages. I couldn't imagine showing up on their doorstep. And my family. That was a whole other kind of cold. I'll be okay, I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. I have space heaters. And a lot of blankets. He turned to face me, his expression serious. He studied my face for a long moment, and I felt utterly transparent, as if he could see the loneliness I worked so hard to hide. As if he could see right through the lie of Mark and the house and the whole damn checklist. All right, he said softly. Well, I'll be here first thing in the morning. Around 8, if that works? Yes, that's fine. He picked up his toolbox and headed for the stairs. I followed him, back up into the slightly less cold but still freezing house. At the front door, he paused again. Try to stay warm, Leo, he said. He used my name, and it sounded different in his mouth. More solid, more real. Then he was gone. The black van pulled out of the driveway, and the house was silent again. But this time, the silence was worse. It was full of his absence. I walked to the thermostat out of habit and stared at the blank display. I touched the grease smudge on my cheek that wasn't there. I could still feel the phantom warmth of his hand on mine. I have a boyfriend. The words felt hollow now, a flimsy shield against a feeling that was growing stronger, warmer, and infinitely more dangerous than the cold. That night was miserable. I huddled in bed under a mountain of blankets, but the cold was relentless. It wasn't just the air. It was a cold that came from inside, a profound sense of isolation that the space heater whirring in the corner couldn't touch. I called Mark. He was at a loud restaurant with his colleagues. Did the guy fix the boiler? He shouted over the din. Not yet. He has to order a part. He's coming back tomorrow. Damn. Well, just bundle up. I'll be home Friday. We'll go out for a nice dinner. He wasn't being unkind. He was just being Mark. Practical. Distant. He couldn't hear the desperation in my voice, the loneliness seeping through the phone line, because he wasn't listening for it. He never had. We hung up, and I was left alone with my thoughts, which all seemed to circle back to a man with coffee-colored eyes and a smudge of grease on his cheek. I replayed every second of his visit, the way his voice rumbled, the accidental brush of our hands, the look in his eyes that made me feel seen for the first time in years. It's just because I'm lonely. Mark's away, the house is cold. It's a fluke. A weird, circumstantial attraction to the first person who has shown me a hint of warmth. It means nothing. I repeated it over and over until I fell into a restless, shivering sleep, and I dreamt of warm hands and a low, steady voice in the dark. He was there at 8 o'clock on the dot. I'd been awake for hours, watching the clock, my stomach in knots. I'd showered and put on a decent sweater, telling myself it was just because I didn't want to look like a slob, but I knew I was lying. I had even made a pot of coffee, the good stuff I usually save for weekends. When I opened the door, he smiled. It was a real smile this time, not just a polite one. Smells good in here, he said, nodding toward the kitchen. That for me. The teasing was gentle, easy. It shouldn't have made my pulse quicken, but it did. I can spare a cup, I said, trying to match his light tone. You're a lifesaver. He followed me into the kitchen, his presence filling the space. He seemed even bigger today, more solid. He placed a small cardboard box on the counter. The part, he announced, tapping it like a prize. I poured him a mug of coffee, black, just the way I took it. He took it from me, and again, that brief, electric touch as our fingers brushed. This time, I didn't pull away so quickly. I let the warmth linger for a fraction of a second longer. He held my gaze over the rim of the mug as he took a sip. That's good coffee, he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Thanks. We stood there for a moment in an oddly domestic silence. It felt comfortable. It felt dangerous. I broke the spell. So, back to the dungeon? He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. Lead the way down in the basement. It felt even colder than yesterday. He got to work immediately, his focus absolute. I took up my position against the wall again, but today felt different. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by a strange, humming tension. I wasn't just a customer watching a repairman. We were two people in a small, cold room, acutely aware of each other. I decided to risk it. "So, do you like this?" "Fixing things." He grunted as he tightened a fitting, the muscles in his arm bunching. "I do," he said after a moment. "It's satisfying. Taking something broken and making it work again. There's a logic to it. A clear right and wrong. Not like other things. I prompted, curious. He paused his work and looked over at me. "People," he said simply. "People aren't logical. You can't just replace a faulty part and have them work perfectly again." The observation hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was so true, so painfully accurate to my own life. I was a machine with a faulty part one couldn't identify, let alone replace. I tried to fix myself by building a life with Mark, but the cold was still there. "No," I said quietly. "You can't." He held my gaze for a long moment, and I knew he'd heard what I hadn't said. He understood. This stranger in my basement understood me better than the man I shared a bed with. He turned back to his work. "What about you? What do you do when you're not freezing in your own house?" "I'm a graphic designer," I told him. "I work from home, mostly. An artist. It's more commercial than that. Logos. Websites. Nothing very romantic." "Doesn't have to be romantic to be creative," he said, his voice slightly muffled as he leaned deep into the boiler's cavity. "You're still making something out of nothing." I respect that. No one had ever said that to me before. Mark called my job, playing on the computer. Alex had called it a cute hobby. But Julian, a man who worked with pipes and wires, saw it as an act of creation. The conversation flowed more easily after that. We talked about stupid things, bad movies, the best pizza place in town, the frustrations of traffic. It was all surface level, but underneath, I felt something else happening. A connection was being forged in the clanking, metallic quiet of my basement. Each shared laugh, each easy exchange, was another thread being woven between us. At one point, he needed me to hold a heavy part in place while he secured it from below. It meant I had to crouch down close to him, our shoulders nearly touching. The small space was suddenly filled with the scent of his soap and the heat radiating from his body. I could hear the soft sound of his breathing, feel the vibration of his voice when he spoke. "Just a little to the left," he murmured, his head right beside my knee. "Perfect. Hold it right there." My hand started to tremble from the strain and the proximity. He was so close. All I had to do was lean forward a few inches, and my face would be in his hair. The thought was so vivid, so overwhelming, that I felt a dizzying rush of panic and desire. I have a boyfriend. He loves me. I am happy. Lie. Got it, he said, his voice breaking through my trance. "You can let go." I scrambled back, putting distance between us, my heart thudding. I felt his eyes on me, but I couldn't bring myself to look at him. I was afraid of what he would see in my face. A few minutes later, there was a loud clunk, a whoosh, and then a low, steady rumble. The boiler shuddered to life. A wave of blessed heat began to radiate from it, the first real warmth the house had known in 2 days. "We have ignition," Julian said, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. He looked boyish and proud, and my chest ached with a feeling I couldn't name. He stood up, wiping his hands on his rag. The grease smudge from yesterday was gone, but there was a fresh one on his jaw. "Should be good to go? It'll take a while for the heat to reach the whole house, but the heart is beating again. Thank you," I said, and the words felt inadequate. "Seriously, thank you so much, all in a day's work," he said, but his eyes told me it was more than that. We both knew it. Back upstairs, the air was already losing its sharp, icy edge. I filled out the payment form on his tablet, my hand unsteady. This was it. The transaction was over. He would leave, and my life would go back to being quiet and safe and cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. The thought was unbearable. I didn't want him to go. He gathered his things, ready to head for the door. I stood there, my mind racing, searching for something, anything, to say that would make him stay a little longer. I never did get you that second cup of coffee," I blurted out. He stopped, his hand on the doorknob. He turned slowly, and his gaze was soft, questioning. "You don't have to do that, Leo. I want to," I said, and it was the truest thing I'd said all week. He hesitated for a long moment. I could see the conflict in his face. He was a professional. This was a job. But there was something else there, too. The same something that was churning in my own gut. Okay, he said finally, his voice low. Okay, he took off his work boots by the door without me having to ask, and followed me back to the kitchen. The silence that fell between us now was different. It wasn't the easy silence of companionship from the basement. It was thick with unspoken questions, with the weight of what we were both feeling but couldn't say. I made the coffee, my movements clumsy. He leaned against the counter, watching me. I could feel his gaze on my back, a tangible pressure. So, Mark gets back Friday? He asked, his voice casual. Too casual. Yeah. Friday night, my own voice was tight. Why did he have to bring up Mark? To remind me? To remind himself? He's a lucky guy, Julian said quietly. I turned around, the coffee mugs in my hands. Why do you say that? This house. Coming home to a hot meal. Good coffee, his eyes met mine, and I knew he wasn't talking about the coffee. My heart was beating a frantic, desperate rhythm. This was the moment. The turning point. I could make a joke, deflect, and let him walk out that door forever. I could retreat back into my fortress and spend the rest of my life wondering what if. Or I could be brave for the first time in a very long time. I put the mugs down on the counter. My hands were shaking. The house is just a house, I said, my voice barely a whisper. And the coffee is just coffee. He didn't say anything. He just watched me, his expression unreadable, waiting. He was giving me the choice. He wouldn't push. And in that moment, I realized the truth about my fortress. It wasn't keeping the world out. It was keeping me in. It was a prison of my own making, and Mark wasn't my partner. He was my warden. A kind, oblivious warden, but a warden nonetheless. Julian started to push himself off the counter. I should probably don't, I said, the word escaping me before I could stop it. Please, don't go, he froze. The space between us crackled. It was no longer just tension. It was a magnetic pull, undeniable and overwhelming. He took a slow step toward me, then another. He stopped when he was only inches away, so close I could see the flecks of gold in his dark brown eyes. Leo, he breathed, and my name was a question, a plea, a warning. He lifted a hand, slowly, as if not to spook me, and gently touched the side of my face. His calloused thumb stroked my cheek, and I leaned into his touch, my eyes fluttering shut. The warmth of his skin was an anchor in a swirling sea of fear and longing. What are we doing? I whispered. I don't know. He whispered back, his voice thick with emotion. But we can't not do it. Can we? And I knew he was right. This feeling, this connection, was more real than anything I had felt in years. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was life, rushing back into the empty rooms of my heart. He leaned in, and I met him halfway. The first touch of his lips was tentative, soft, a question. And I answered by pressing back, by opening myself up to him. To this, to everything I had been so afraid of. The kiss was not frantic or desperate. It was slow and deep and full of a profound, soul-shattering tenderness. It was a kiss that tasted of coffee and cold air and the promise of warmth. In that kiss, my fortress crumbled. The walls came down, the checklist burned to ashes, and the shallow sea of my life with Mark evaporated, revealing the vast, terrifying, beautiful ocean beneath. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes still closed. I could feel the steady beat of his heart against my chest, or maybe it was my own. They seemed to be beating in unison. I have a boyfriend, I whispered, the words a ghost of a defense, a final, futile attempt to cling to the wreckage of my old life. Julian pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes. His gaze was steady, unwavering. No, he said, his voice gentle but firm. I don't think you do. Not really. And he was right. I didn't. Maybe I never had. The hours that followed were a blur of conversation and discovery. We didn't move from the kitchen. We just stood there, leaning against the counter, and talked. We talked for what felt like days. He told me about growing up in a small town, about feeling like he never quite fit in. He told me about his ex-wife, a woman who loved the idea of him, the strong, capable man who could fix anything, but who was terrified of the quiet, thoughtful man underneath. He told me about his loneliness, a quiet ache that he carried with him on every job, into every stranger's house. And I told him everything. I told him about Alex, about the way he'd made me feel small and broken. I told him about Mark, about how I had chosen him not out of love, but out of fear. I confessed that our life together was a carefully curated performance of happiness, a lie I had been telling myself for 2 years. The words poured out of me, a flood of truths I had kept locked away for so long. And he listened. He just listened, his dark eyes full of a deep, resonant empathy. He didn't try to fix me. He just made me feel seen. As we talked, the house slowly, surely, warmed up. The radiators began to hiss and ping, coming back to life. The chill receded from the air, replaced by a comfortable, enveloping warmth that seemed to emanate not just from the newly repaired boiler, but from the connection crackling between us. At some point, the sun began to set, painting the kitchen in hues of orange and pink. Julian's van was still in my driveway. His toolbox was still by my front door. It felt as though the outside world had ceased to exist. There was only this room, this warmth, this man. I have to call him, I said, the thought of Mark a sudden, jarring intrusion. I have to tell him. The idea filled me with a familiar dread, the fear of confrontation, of causing pain. Julian reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. His grip was a silent promise of support. I know, he said softly. You have to do what's right, he didn't say for us. He said what's right. And that, more than anything, solidified the rightness of it all. He wasn't trying to possess me or claim me. He was giving me the space to find my own way, to make my own choices. I pulled out my phone. My hands were still shaking, but my resolve was firm. I walked into the living room, needing a bit of space. Julian stayed in the kitchen, giving me my privacy, but I could feel his presence, a silent source of strength. Mark answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful, oblivious. Hey, everything warm and toasty over there. My throat closed up. For a second, I couldn't speak. I looked around the room, at the furniture Mark and I had picked out together, at the life I had built as a shield. It all looked like a stage set. It wasn't real. Leo? You there? Mark, I said, my voice thin. We need to talk. The conversation was one of the hardest things I have ever had to do. I was honest. I didn't blame him. I blamed myself, my fear, my inability to be the partner he deserved because I hadn't been honest with him or with myself. He was confused at first, then angry, then hurt. He asked if there was someone else. I looked toward the kitchen, toward the silhouette of the man leaning against the doorframe, waiting. Yes, I said, the word both a confession and a liberation. When it was over, I felt drained, hollowed out, but also strangely light. I had finally stopped running. I had finally told the truth. I walked back into the kitchen where Julian was waiting. He didn't ask what happened. He just opened his arms, and I walked into them. He held me for a long time, his arms wrapped tightly around me as I trembled with the emotional aftershocks. He didn't say a word. He just held me, offering silent, unconditional comfort. I buried my face in his shoulder, breathing in his scent, and for the first time, I felt like I was home. Not in this house, but in his arms. Eventually, my trembling subsided. I pulled back, wiping my eyes. I'm a mess, I mumbled. You're brave, he corrected me gently. He brushed a stray tear from my cheek with his thumb. What you just did was incredibly brave. We stayed up late into the night, moving from the kitchen to the living room couch. We sat close, his arm around my shoulders, my head resting against his chest. The house was finally, completely warm, every corner filled with a gentle, radiant heat. We talked more, but it was different now. The frantic energy of confession was gone, replaced by a quiet, unfolding intimacy. We shared stories from our childhoods, our dreams, our fears. It felt like we were mapping each other's souls. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because I woke up with a blanket draped over me and my head in Julian's lap. The first light of dawn was filtering through the windows. He was awake, watching me, a soft, tender expression on his face. Morning, he whispered, his voice rough with sleep. You stayed, I said, the words thick in my throat. I wasn't going anywhere, he replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He ran his fingers through my hair, and I closed my eyes, savoring the simple, profound intimacy of the gesture. The next few days were a strange, beautiful limbo. Mark would be back on Friday to pack his things. Julian and I existed in a bubble, suspended between my past and our future. He would go to work in the morning in his immaculate black van and return in the evening, bringing with him takeout or groceries. We cooked together in my kitchen, our bodies brushing past each other in the easy dance of domesticity. We watch movies on the couch. We talk for hours. We learn the rhythms of each other's breathing, the cadence of each other's speech. It was all so new, so fast, but it felt more natural and right than the 2 years I had spent with Mark. With Julian, there were no pretenses. I didn't have to perform. I could just be. He saw all of me, the anxious, overthinking parts, the scared parts, the hopeful parts, and he didn't flinch. He seemed to cherish them. On Thursday night, the night before Mark was due to come home, a nervous energy settled over me. Julian sensed it immediately. "You're worried about tomorrow," he said, stating it as a fact, not a question. We were sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by packing boxes I'd bought earlier. "I just hate that I hurt him," I admitted. "He's not a bad person. He just wasn't the right person, and you weren't the right person for him, either," Julian added gently. "You both deserve to be with someone who sees you. All of you." He took my hand. "It's okay to be sad about the ending, even if you know it's the right one." His understanding was a balm on my frayed nerves. He didn't try to dismiss my guilt or my sadness. He just made space for it. He made space for all of my messy, complicated feelings. The next day was as difficult as I had imagined. Mark was quiet, his face a mask of hurt and betrayal. I helped him pack, the silence between us heavy and suffocating. Julian had made himself scarce, giving us the space we needed. "I'll be back later," he'd said that morning, squeezing my shoulder. "Call me if you need anything." As Mark carried his last box out to his car, he paused at the door. "I hope you know what you're doing, Leo," he said, his voice flat. "I do," I said, and for the first time, I was sure of it. "I'm sorry, Mark. For everything." He just shook his head and left. I closed the door and leaned against it, the quiet of the house pressing in on me. But it wasn't the cold, empty silence from before. It was a peaceful silence, a silence of new beginnings. An hour later, Julian's van pulled into the driveway. He walked in and found me in the living room, staring at the empty spaces where Mark's things used to be. He didn't say anything. He just came over, sat down on the floor beside me, and wrapped his arms around me. We sat there for a long time, watching the dust motes dance in the afternoon light, the warm air from the vents humming a quiet, steady song. It's funny looking back. My whole world changed because of a broken machine in a cold basement, a faulty pilot assembly, and a fried thermocouple. It seems so mundane, so ridiculously simple. But maybe that's how it works. Maybe life doesn't change in the grand, sweeping moments, but in the small, quiet ones. A shared glance, a brush of hands, the decision to offer a stranger a cup of coffee. The house isn't just a house anymore. It's a home. We've painted the walls, filled the empty spaces. Julian's tools have found a permanent place in the garage, next to my design supplies. We are two creators, side by side, building something new, something real. He still fixes things that are broken, and I still make things out of nothing. And together, we have fixed the broken, empty silence. We have filled it with laughter and conversation and the easy, comfortable quiet of two people who have found their other half. Sometimes, when he comes home from a long day, smelling of oil and hard work, he'll pull me into his arms, and I'll rest my head on his chest, listening to the steady, logical rhythm of his heart. And I'll think about how afraid I was of being seen, of being known. Now, being seen by him is the thing that makes me feel safest. He took something broken, and he didn't just fix it. He made it better. He made it warm. He made it work again. Have you ever found love in a place you never, ever expected to?